In the late 1930s, a dark shadow was stretching across Europe. The world watched with growing fear as Nazi Germany began its aggressive march, and with it came whispers of a new and terrible power. Scientists, some of whom had fled the tyranny of the Third Reich, understood that recent discoveries in nuclear physics could lead to a weapon of unimaginable destruction. The fear was simple and profound. What if Hitler's scientists were the first to unlock this power? This chilling possibility set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of human history, pushing the world into a new and terrifying age. The race was not for glory or for land. It was a race against a potential apocalypse held in the hands of a madman. This deep-seated anxiety reached the highest levels of the United States government. In 1939, the brilliant physicist Albert Einstein, a refugee himself, signed a letter addressed to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The letter was a stark warning, explaining that the element uranium could be turned into a new source of energy, powerful enough to create extremely powerful bombs of a new type. He urged the president to act, to gather the nation's brightest minds and resources to explore this possibility before Germany could. Roosevelt understood the gravity of the situation. He knew that to hesitate could mean defeat, not just in the war, but for the future of the free world itself, and so the Manhattan Project was born. It was a top-secret endeavour of a scale never seen before, a colossal undertaking shrouded in mystery. The mission was clear but daunting: to build an atomic bomb. The project drew upon the full might of American industry, military and science. Across the country, in hidden facilities and secret laboratories, thousands of people worked on pieces of a puzzle they could not see in its entirety. They were driven by a sense of urgent purpose, united by the shared fear of what would happen if they failed. The project's success depended on finding a leader who could not only grasp the complex science, but also command the respect of a team of brilliant and often eccentric geniuses. The military head of this vast operation was General Leslie Groves, a man known for his decisive and no-nonsense approach. He was a builder, an organizer, a man who could get things done, but he needed a scientific counterpart, a mind that could navigate the uncharted territory of nuclear physics. The choice he made was, to many, a surprise. He selected a theoretical physicist from California, a man known for his intellectual prowess, his charisma, and his complex personality. His name was J. Robert Oppenheimer. This slender, intense man was about to be handed the monumental task of directing the scientific heart of the Manhattan Project, and, in doing so, stepping into the very centre of history's most dangerous storm. J. Robert Oppenheimer was a man of many contradictions. He was a scholar of Sanskrit poetry and a master of quantum mechanics, a charismatic leader who often seemed lost in his own thoughts. Before the war, he was a celebrated professor at the University of California, Berkeley, known for his captivating lectures and his deep understanding of the universe's most fundamental secrets. Yet he had no experience leading a project of any significant size. General Groves saw past this, recognizing in Oppenheimer a fierce ambition and an unparalleled intellect that could unite the diverse group of top-tier scientists needed for the job. Oppenheimer, in turn, saw the project as a technical challenge of the highest order, a duty he felt compelled to undertake for his country. To create the bomb, a special place was needed, a laboratory that was isolated, secure, and hidden from the world. It was Oppenheimer himself who suggested the site, a remote mesa in the high desert of New Mexico called Los Alamos. He had a deep love for the stark, beautiful landscape of the region, and he knew its isolation would be perfect for their secret work. Under his guidance, a city sprang up from nothing, a strange community of log cabins and laboratories surrounded by barbed wire and military guards. Here, brilliant minds from across the world, Nobel laureates, promising young physicists and expert engineers, gathered to solve the most difficult scientific problem ever faced. Life at Los Alamos was a unique blend of intense intellectual pressure and strange, isolated normalcy. By day, the scientists worked tirelessly, their chalkboards filled with complex equations that describe the very fabric of matter and energy. They debated, argued, and collaborated in a feverish push toward their goal. By night, they tried to live ordinary lives in an extraordinary place. Oppenheimer's wife, Kitty, became a central social figure, organizing parties and maintaining a sense of community in the high-pressure environment. Oppenheimer himself was the undeniable center of this universe, the maestro conducting a symphony of genius, guiding every section and ensuring every note was played to perfection, all leading to a single, explosive crescendo. As the director, Oppenheimer was more than just a manager. He was the intellectual soul of the laboratory. He moved between different research groups, effortlessly grasping the details of chemistry, engineering, and theoretical physics. He had an almost magical ability to ask the right question, to see the connection between two seemingly unrelated problems, and to inspire his teams to push beyond what they thought was possible. He fostered an atmosphere of open debate, believing that the only way to solve the problem was through collective effort and intellectual honesty. It was this unique leadership style that held the entire fragile enterprise together, driving it forward toward its terrifying and world-changing destination. As the summer of 1945 arrived, the work at Los Alamos reached a critical point. The scientists had developed a viable design for a plutonium-based atomic bomb, but a profound uncertainty remained. The complex chain reaction it relied upon was purely theoretical. No one could be absolutely sure it would work as predicted. A test was necessary. The chosen site was a desolate stretch of the New Mexico desert known as the Jornada del Muerto, or Journey of the Dead. The test was codenamed Trinity, a name Oppenheimer later said was inspired by a poem. As the date approached, tension mounted. The test was timed to coincide with the Potsdam Conference, where President Truman would meet with Allied leaders, hoping to have a powerful new card to play in post-war negotiations. On the night of July 15, 1945, a storm raged over the desert, lashing the test site with rain and lightning. The scientists and military personnel huddled in bunkers miles away, their anxiety growing with each delay. Oppenheimer, chain-smoking and visibly tense, paced back and forth. The weight of the entire project, of the lives lost and the money spent, rested on his shoulders. If the device, affectionately nicknamed the Gadget, failed to detonate, the project would be a catastrophic failure. If it was too powerful, some feared it might ignite the atmosphere and destroy the world. Finally, the storm subsided and the countdown began again, ticking towards a new dawn at 5:29 a.m. Then it happened. In the pre-dawn darkness, a light brighter than 1,000 suns erupted over the desert floor, instantly turning night into day. A colossal fireball, a swirling mass of orange, purple and white, surged upward, growing into a terrifying mushroom cloud that climbed miles into the sky. The heat could be felt from miles away, and the shockwave that followed knocked men to the ground. The sheer raw power was beyond anything anyone had ever witnessed or imagined. It was a terrifying and awe-inspiring spectacle, a moment when humanity had successfully unlocked the fundamental power of the stars and brought it down to Earth. The atomic age had begun. In the moments that followed the blast, a mixture of triumph, relief and profound dread washed over the observers. One scientist remarked, "We're probably now all sons of bitches." Oppenheimer's reaction was more poetic and far more haunting. As he watched the beautiful and terrible cloud ascend, he recalled a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. The successful test was a monumental scientific achievement, but for Oppenheimer it was also a moment of terrifying clarity. He understood, perhaps more than anyone, that the world would never be the same. The power they had unleashed was now a reality, and its shadow would loom over humanity forever. With the success of the Trinity test confirmed, the decision of how to use this new weapon fell to President Harry S. Truman. The war in Europe was over, but the conflict in the Pacific raged on with brutal intensity. An invasion of the Japanese mainland was planned, an operation that military leaders predicted would cost hundreds of thousands of American lives and even more Japanese lives. From this perspective, the atomic bomb appeared to be a tool that could force a swift surrender, saving countless lives by ending the war quickly. A coded telegram from the Trinity site had informed Truman of the bomb's power, giving him immense leverage at the Potsdam Conference and solidifying his resolve to use it. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay flew high over Japan. Its target was the city of Hiroshima, a major industrial and military hub. At 8:15 a.m., a single bomb, codenamed Little Boy, was released from its bay. It fell for less than a minute before detonating in a flash of blinding light and incinerating heat. In an instant, the heart of the city was vaporized. Buildings were flattened, and a firestorm engulfed what remained. Tens of thousands of people were killed instantly, with tens of thousands more succumbing to horrific injuries and radiation sickness in the days, weeks, and years that followed. The world had just witnessed the devastating power that had been born in the New Mexico desert. Despite the unprecedented destruction of Hiroshima, the Japanese government did not immediately surrender. Some within the military leadership were determined to fight to the very end. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second B-29 bomber took to the skies. This time the target was the city of Nagasaki. The bomb it carried, Fat Man, was a plutonium device similar in design to the one tested at Trinity. It unleashed another wave of catastrophic destruction, wiping out another city and killing tens of thousands more. The 1-2 punch of these atomic attacks proved to be too much. Faced with the threat of total annihilation, Emperor Hirohito intervened, and on August 15th, Japan announced its unconditional surrender. World War II was finally over. The news of Japan's surrender was met with jubilation across the Allied nations. The scientists at Los Alamos shared in the relief that the brutal war had ended, and their work was celebrated as the decisive factor that had brought peace. Yet, underneath the celebrations, a deep sense of unease began to grow. The grainy photographs and harrowing eyewitness accounts that emerged from Hiroshima and Nagasaki revealed the true human cost of their creation. The abstract scientific problem they had solved had resulted in the very real suffering of hundreds of thousands of people. The joy of victory was forever tainted by the horror of the means used to achieve it, a moral burden that many of the project's creators, especially Oppenheimer, would carry for the rest of their lives. In the aftermath of the war, J. Robert Oppenheimer was hailed as a national hero. He was the father of the atomic bomb, the man whose genius had helped bring victory. His face graced the covers of magazines, and he was celebrated as a symbol of American scientific prowess. But privately, Oppenheimer was tormented. The theoretical triumph of the Trinity test had given way to the horrific reality of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The images of the flattened cities and the accounts of human suffering weighed heavily on his conscience. He felt a profound sense of responsibility for the destructive power he had helped unleash upon the world, a power he now feared would spiral out of control. This deep-seated guilt and anxiety drove him to seek a meeting with President Truman. On October 25, 1945, just a few months after the bombings, Oppenheimer was ushered into the Oval Office. He hoped to convey his fears about a future nuclear arms race and to advocate for international control over this new technology. The meeting was tense from the start. Oppenheimer, overwrought with emotion, struggled to articulate his concerns. Finally, in a moment of raw anguish, he looked at the President and uttered the now famous words, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." This was not what Truman wanted or expected to hear from the man who had delivered him the ultimate weapon. President Truman was infuriated by Oppenheimer's statement. He was a practical, decisive leader who saw the bomb as a military tool that had saved American lives and ended a terrible war. He viewed Oppenheimer's display of guilt as a sign of weakness, a scientist's naive inability to grasp the harsh realities of global politics. Truman sharply retorted, "The blood is on my hands. You let me worry about that." He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to Oppenheimer, dismissing his moral crisis. The meeting ended abruptly. As Oppenheimer left, Truman turned to his staff and angrily declared that he never wanted to see that crybaby scientist in his office ever again. The confrontation with Truman marked a turning point for Oppenheimer. It became painfully clear that the leaders who now controlled the bomb did not share his deep misgivings or his vision for the future. The very people he had served now saw him as a nuisance, an overly emotional academic who didn't understand the world of power politics. This rejection was not just a personal slight, it was a fundamental clash of worldviews. Oppenheimer, the scientist, saw a new and existential threat to humanity that required a new way of thinking. Truman, the politician, saw a new and powerful weapon in a nation's arsenal. This chasm between them would define Oppenheimer's post-war life and set him on a collision course with the very government he had so diligently served. In the months following the war, Oppenheimer dedicated himself to a new mission, preventing a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union. He believed that the secret of the bomb could not be kept forever and that the only path to safety lay in transparency and international cooperation. Along with many of his fellow scientists from Los Alamos, he championed the idea of placing all nuclear technology and materials under the control of an international agency. They argued for scientific openness, believing that a world where nations shared knowledge would be safer than one where they developed devastating weapons in secret, fueled by suspicion and fear. This was a radical idea, a call to rethink the very nature of national sovereignty in the new atomic age. However, a very different vision was taking hold within the corridors of power in Washington. The US military and many government officials saw the atomic bomb not as a global problem to be solved, but as America's ultimate advantage. They believed that maintaining a monopoly on nuclear weapons was the key to securing American dominance in the post-war world. A top-secret memo, drafted even before the war had officially ended, laid out a chilling plan. It identified the Soviet Union as the next great adversary and outlined a strategy for the mass production of atomic bombs, targeting dozens of Soviet cities for potential obliteration. The path was being paved not for cooperation, but for confrontation. Oppenheimer found himself caught between these two opposing forces. As the chairman of the General Advisory Committee to the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission, he was in a position of influence, and he used it to argue passionately against the military's push for escalation. His greatest battle came when some scientists, led by his former Los Alamos colleague Edward Teller, began advocating for the development of a far more powerful weapon, the hydrogen bomb or super. Oppenheimer and his committee advised strongly against this, arguing that it was a weapon of genocide with no clear military purpose, and that its development would only accelerate a catastrophic arms race. This opposition to the hydrogen bomb placed Oppenheimer in direct conflict with powerful figures in the government, most notably Lewis Strauss, a commissioner and later chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. Strauss was a staunch Cold Warrior who saw Oppenheimer's hesitation as naive at best and unpatriotic at worst. He believed that American security depended on having the biggest and most powerful weapons, regardless of the moral implications. The debate over the H-bomb was more than a technical disagreement. It was a battle for the soul of American nuclear policy. It was a fork in the road, and Oppenheimer's choice to advocate for restraint would ultimately have severe personal and professional consequences. The growing chasm between Oppenheimer's vision for control and the military's ambition for dominance became unbearable. He felt increasingly alienated from the direction the country was taking, a direction that seemed to ignore the very dangers he had helped create. Troubled by the relentless push for a massive nuclear arsenal and the development of new, more destructive weapons, Oppenheimer decided he could no longer lead the laboratory that had been his life's work. In the autumn of 1945, he resigned as the director of the Los Alamos laboratory, the secret city in the desert that he had willed into existence. His departure marked the end of an era for both himself and the scientists who had worked under him. On October 16, 1945, the community of Los Alamos gathered for his farewell ceremony. The men and women who had followed him, who had solved the unsolvable under his guidance, came to say goodbye. But Oppenheimer's final speech was not one of nostalgic remembrance or self-congratulation. Instead, he delivered a stark and prophetic warning, a plea to his fellow scientists and to the world. He spoke of the profound responsibility they all shared. He acknowledged their pride in their technical success, but cautioned them against celebrating a weapon that had caused such immense suffering and brought such a terrible new reality into the world. With a sombre and powerful tone, he laid out the two possible futures he saw for humanity. He warned that if atomic bombs were simply added to the military arsenals of a warring world, if nations continued on their path of conflict and suspicion, then a time of unimaginable horror would surely come. In his most memorable and chilling line, he declared, "If atomic bombs are to be added as new weapons to the arsenals of a warring world, then the time will come when mankind will curse the name of Los Alamos and of Hiroshima." It was a direct challenge to the prevailing mood of triumphalism, a call to see beyond the short-term victory to the long-term peril. His speech concluded with a simple but profound ultimatum for all of civilization. The choice, as he saw it, was absolute. There was no middle ground, no way to safely manage these new weapons within the old systems of international rivalry. The peoples of this world must unite, he urged, or they will perish. It was the cry of a man who had looked into the abyss and was desperately trying to warn others of what he had seen. He left Los Alamos not as a celebrated hero retiring in glory, but as a modern-day prophet, haunted by his creation and burdened with a message that the world, in its rush toward the Cold War, was not yet ready to hear. Oppenheimer's vocal opposition to the hydrogen bomb and his continued calls for international control made him powerful enemies. Chief among them was Lewis Strauss, the ambitious chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. Strauss deeply resented Oppenheimer's influence and viewed his stance on the H-bomb as a direct threat to American national security. Fueled by personal animosity and political ambition, Strauss began a quiet but relentless campaign to discredit Oppenheimer and remove him from any position of power. He used his influence to gather information, digging into Oppenheimer's past, looking for any connections or associations that could be used against him in the paranoid atmosphere of the Cold War. In 1954, at the height of McCarthy-era anti-communist hysteria, Strauss made his move. He orchestrated a security hearing designed to strip Oppenheimer of his security clearance. The official charges were a collection of old and often flimsy accusations, including his pre-war associations with known communists and his opposition to the H-bomb project. The hearing was, as Oppenheimer himself later called it, a farce. It was not a fair trial, but a carefully managed inquest designed to reach a predetermined conclusion. His history was twisted, his words were taken out of context, and his loyalty to the United States was put on public trial. Despite a passionate defense and overwhelming support from the scientific community, the outcome was all but certain. Nearly 500 scientists from Los Alamos signed a protest in his defense, and many esteemed colleagues testified to his character and loyalty. But the political climate was toxic. The prosecution, led by a lawyer handpicked by Strauss, relentlessly attacked his credibility and patriotism. They painted him as an arrogant and untrustworthy intellectual who could not be trusted with the nation's most sensitive secrets. The very man who had once held all of the nation's nuclear secrets in his mind was now being portrayed as a security risk. In the end, the board voted to revoke J. Robert Oppenheimer's security clearance. The decision was a devastating blow, a public humiliation for a man once celebrated as a national hero. It effectively ended his career in government service and silenced his influential voice on nuclear policy. He was cast out, exiled from the world of power he had helped to create. The fall from grace was complete. The father of the atomic bomb, the brilliant mind behind the Manhattan Project, had been brought down by the very political system he had sought to serve and protect from the dangers he understood better than anyone else. It was a tragic and bitter end to his public life. After the humiliation of the security hearing, Oppenheimer retreated from the world of politics and policy. He returned to academia, taking up his post as the director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. There, he created a haven for scholars and thinkers, mentoring a new generation of physicists. Though silenced on the national stage, he continued to lecture and write, reflecting on the relationship between science and society. He even visited Japan in 1960, a quiet journey that spoke volumes about the burden he continued to carry. He never regained his security clearance during his lifetime, but he was not entirely forgotten by the establishment. As the years passed and the political climate softened, there were gestures of reconciliation. President John F. Kennedy, seeking to mend the rift between the government and the scientific community, chose to award Oppenheimer the prestigious Enrico Fermi Award in 1963, the highest honor in nuclear science. Though Kennedy was assassinated before he could present the award, his successor, President Lyndon B. Johnson, carried out the ceremony. It was a symbolic moment of rehabilitation, a tacit admission that a great injustice had been done. Oppenheimer accepted the award with quiet dignity, a man who had outlived many of his adversaries but remained forever marked by his experiences. Oppenheimer died of throat cancer in 1967 at the age of 62. He left behind a legacy as complex and contradictory as the man himself. He was a brilliant scientist who led a monumental achievement, a patriot who served his country in its hour of need. He was also a tormented soul who came to deeply regret the destructive power he had unlocked. He is remembered both as the father of the atomic bomb and as one of its most prescient critics. His life serves as a powerful and enduring cautionary tale about the moral responsibilities of scientists and the immense danger of letting technology outpace human wisdom. Today, history views J. Robert Oppenheimer with a mixture of awe and sorrow. He is seen not just as a great physicist, but as a tragic figure at the centre of the 20th century's defining drama. His famous quote, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," echoes through time as a haunting summary of his life's work. He gave humanity the power to destroy itself, and then spent the rest of his life warning us not to use it. His story is a permanent reminder that the greatest challenges we face are not always technical but moral, and that the line between genius and catastrophe can be terrifyingly thin.